right, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you to everyone who is in the midst of joining or has already joined. My name is Manny Yekutiel, and I'm going to be moderating tonight's forum. Thank you for joining in. Appreciate the time that you're giving to this AD17 Candidates Forum on Small Business. All four candidates are here. These are the folks running to replace David Chiu, representing the eastern half of San Francisco in the State Assembly. And they're participating in tonight's forum on small business with a special focus on businesses from historically disadvantaged communities. Candidates will have the opportunity to discuss their records and their policies as they relate to the broad set of issues important to small businesses in San Francisco. I'm sure we all know this, especially the people on this call, but the special election primary is going to be in, 12 days, February 15th. It's a two-round system. No candidate wins with a simple majority of votes in the primary election. Then it's going to go to the top two vote getters. The general election, if that happens, will be April 19th, 2022. Listen, our hope with tonight's forum is that it'll help inform you, the voters, to help make your choice in the primary election on February 15th. None of the sponsoring organizations have endorsed anyone in this race, including myself, and this event is being recorded and will be posted online. Oh, I should say a little bit about myself, probably. My name is Manny Yekutiel. I own a small business. I'm in it right now. I'm in what was our mop closet, but is now my office. And it's a restaurant, bookstore, and venue on the corner of 16th and Valencia. I'm also on the board of the Valencia Corridor Merchants Association. Before we bring the candidates on, I'd like to invite our four fabulous sponsoring organizations to jump on very briefly, because we're on a tight time schedule tonight, to talk about their work and maybe name the top thing that they'd like their candidates to address. We'll start with one of the first people that I met in small business, the colorful, articulate, always fabulously dressed Carlos Solorzano Cuadra, the CEO of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Carlos?
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure for me being one of the sponsors of this organization. I am a small business owner with Multivision Latina and being in the Mission District in San Francisco since 1984. And I am also the CEO of the Hispanic Chambers of Commerce in San Francisco. I'm really glad to be here. We are one of the strongest Latino advocates for small businesses and for minority and the diversity that we have in our beautiful city. Welcome, everybody, and looking forward to hear what they have to say in order to support more the Latino and the local small businesses with the diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. We love you so much. And now let's welcome Jose Petro, the chairman of the San Francisco Filipino American Chamber of Commerce. Jose.
Thank you, Manny. My name is Jose Petro. Real pleasure to be here. Good evening to everyone. Founded in 1976, and as it was then, as it is still today, our organization exists to promote and enhance the Filipino American business community in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our overarching belief in achieving our mission and goals adopts the Golden State Warriors motto through their strength in numbers approach. We are that organization embracing the collaboration of like-minded stakeholders in pursuit of what we all want, a better business and civic community in San Francisco. Just a quick side note, wanted to introduce our new president, CJ Bob. Shout out to CJ, who's going to be leading our organization for the next couple of years. So on behalf of the San Francisco Filipino American Chamber of Commerce, we thank each candidates, David Campos, Matt Haney, Bilal Mahmood, Thea Selby, for the opportunity to learn more about them and their positions for small business given these extraordinary times. I hand it back over to you, Manny.
Thank you so much, Jose. Appreciate that. And now we're going to go to Masood Samiri, excuse me. He's the executive director of the Golden Gate Jose. Masood is San Francisco.
Let me fix that. Thank you.
Masood,
thank you, Manny.
Fix me. Help me.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Manny. Good evening, everyone. My name is Masood Samiri. I'm the president of Castro Merchants, broker owner of Aria Properties, and the current president of San Francisco Council of District Merchants. Council of District Merchants have been advocating to support, promote the small business in San Francisco for the past 70 years. advocating for about 43,000 small businesses with about 200 and close to 220,000 employees, who many of them live and vote in San Francisco. We had a great working relationship with David Chiu when he was in this position, and looking forward be working with any of you candidates who's going to be chosen to take this role. And I would like to thank the ones who have reached out to us, the candidates who have reached out to their small business with Castro Merchants and SFCDMA for reaching out to us and trying to start the dialogue. Thank you, and appreciate the opportunity. Back to you, Manny.
See, Masood, you and I were on that Castro Merchants call earlier, and now you're wearing your CDMA hat. You're making this complicated for me. It's been a long day. Now let's hear from Terry Beswick, who is the Executive Director of the Golden Gate Business Association. And honey, she's the organizer of tonight's event. Terry?
Hey, Manny, thank you so much for doing this for us tonight. And thank you also to the co-sponsoring organizations. It's really great to come together and build a coalition that can do this kind of thing. So I think we have a lot more to do together. So the GGBA, so we're a leading advocate for LGBTQ businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area since 1974. So we're almost 50 years old. Our mission is to champion opportunity, development, and advocacy for LGBTQ and the allied business community. So we're the largest San Francisco Bay Area LGBTQ business advocacy organization, and we're the official affiliate organization of the National LGBTQ Chamber. Don't you love how LGBTQ just rolls off my lips nowadays? It just like flows. LGBTQ Chamber, and we work with the National Chamber to certify businesses like Manny's as LGBTQ business enterprises to increase their business opportunities. So we create opportunities for marketing, networking, procurement, and referral-based business growth. We have workshops, seminars. We advocate for positive economic, social, and political change. And so you can find out more about us at ggba.com/memberships, Manny. And so with that, I also just want to say thank you for the candidates for joining us tonight. We're really looking forward to hearing what you're going to do to help small businesses, especially from underrepresented communities or historically disadvantaged communities. And in particular, I'm interested in hearing about what kind of procurement opportunities you might be able to advocate for on a statewide level for minority certified businesses. So. And with that, thank you, Manny, for doing this. And also thank you, Flo, Kim in the background there for putting together tonight's event.
Thank you, Flo and Kim. Thank you, Terry, for that. I think those are our four. These are amazing organizations. So I'm feeling the digital applause coming from our audience. And to all of you who are going to listen post-event, know that these four organizations are wonderful. And I know the links to them. Their organizations will be in the chat. My goal for candidates is to keep this tight. I know you've had a lot of these debates and forums. I listen to the Commonwealth Club once a day. I do not envy you. So I'm going to try to keep this zippy. Kim is going to be keeping time. We're going to bring our four candidates on now. David Campos, Matt Haney, Bilal Mahmood, and Thea Selby. We're going to skip introductions. We're going to post links to their campaigns in the chat so they don't have to do it. And we're going to get right into it. So small businesses are the lifeblood of San Francisco's diverse culture and economy. We know that. Prior to the pandemic, small businesses often faced great hurdles in getting started and surviving. The challenges can be even greater for historically disadvantaged communities, and the pandemic has exacerbated conditions for small businesses on many levels. The question, what are our representatives in the State Assembly going to do to help our small businesses recover and thrive? Hopefully, we will figure out the answer to that in the next hour or so. There are going to be no opening statements. We're going to go right to questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. They'll get a 30-second warning and then an alert that their 2 minutes is up. If a candidate mentions another candidate by name, the candidate that they called out can be offered 30 seconds to reply as time allows. It's a forum, not a debate, so I'm going to try to keep things moving. Audience members can post questions or comments in the Q&A and chat. I'm happy to ask them if it's a good question, and we'll try to get to them as time allows. It's being recorded and posted online at ggba.com website and on the other sponsor candidate sites at their option. Are we ready to get started, everyone? Yes, are we alive? We're here. Great. A bunch of the questions are going to apply for all four. There's one or two that are going to be specific to each of you. Let's start with this one. What do you believe are the two most pressing issues facing small business today? Let's start with you, Thea.
Okay, well, let's see. I think one of the big issues is foot traffic. We need to get our people back on the streets and back into stores, into cafes, into restaurants safely, of course. But that is an issue. If you don't have customers as a small business, unless you're online as well, as a merchant in particular, then you're in trouble. I did note as I was sort of preparing for this that there was a movement during our Small Business Week to ditch Amazon. And I don't know if I can put that in the same category, but certainly, you know, Amazon has put a real dent in local businesses. And I think we want to, you know, buy local as much as possible. I think a second issue with foot traffic is employees. I think it's been difficult these days. We are in the midst of the great resignation, as they call it. I don't know to what extent this is hitting all merchants, but I do try to talk to merchants and other small businesses, and a lot of people are quitting for whatever reason. Either they have, you know, they're emotionally drained and they can't continue anymore. They have children or they have parents at home and they need to stay home and they're not able to work anymore. The money's not worth it. There's no childcare. There are all sorts of things. So I think, you know, looking for employees who are able to help merchants is also something that we need to look out for. Is how do we make it both feasible and attractive for people to go back to work, especially when that work requires them to actually be someplace. Because we really have two sets of workers here. We have workers who can do what they want from their own homes and Zoom, and then we have other workers who actually have to be in stores and be with people. And I sort of envy them.
Thank you so much, Thea. So foot traffic and hiring and employees. David, same question.
Thank you. Thank you again to all the four organizations for hosting this and Manny for moderating. Look, I think that everyone has been hit really hard by the pandemic, but I think small businesses especially. And I think that just the first thing that I would say is just being able to stay open and afloat. I think that requires more help from the state and federal government. And I think that we need to do something else at the state level to support financially our small businesses. I speak from my own personal experience. I think one of the most significant pieces of legislation that happened to help small businesses in San Francisco, which I authored, was the legacy business legislation. And I know that the financial assistance provided by legacy businesses through that program has helped so many small businesses stay open, especially during the pandemic. I think that we need a recovery strategy that goes beyond what the federal government has done. And I personally will advocate, if I'm elected to the state assembly, that the state of California provide financial assistance to small businesses to keep their doors open. The second thing, and I think that this is really critical, is long-term. I think that we need to provide not just assistance to the individual businesses, but I actually think that the collective ability of businesses to promote themselves through these business corridors is really critical. And this goes to the second piece of legislation that I authored that I'm very proud of, which is the creation of a cultural district. And that especially has been critical to allow these minority-owned businesses in many areas to be able to market and promote themselves. And I think that the city should do more. And quite frankly, what I want to do at the state level is bring that idea, not only the cultural district, but the legacy business to the statewide level so that other areas can benefit from those programs.
Thank you. So I heard being able to stay afloat, helping them financially more, and collective ability of small businesses to promote themselves. Same question to you, Bilal.
Thank you, Manny, and thank you for the question. I think for me, it draws from my experience or career. A lot of my career has focused on small business, both in the public and the private sector. I worked in the Obama administration in the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which was focused on small business policy. I built a nonprofit that helped with micro lending services for other small businesses across the globe, as well as in our country as well. And I started a foundation to help workers. And operating that foundation over the last 2 years when the pandemic began, I asked businesses that we were trying to support here in San Francisco, what are the top 3 issues that you were worried about, not during the pandemic, but what were you worried about once the pandemic was over? Back then, we thought it was going to be over a lot earlier than it was. But I wanted to get a sense like what was the issues that was plaguing them from the beginning. And every single business mentioned the same 2 things, which was access to, or 3 things, access to capital, commercial rent debt, and supporting their workers. Access to capital was that small businesses in San Francisco don't have the same access to capital to financial institutions and larger banks that say Michelin star restaurants do. And that's why a lot of small businesses were closing, especially family and immigrant-owned restaurants as well, and businesses here in the city. So we need to better support micro-lending services that I've seen work in the nonprofit sector and my own nonprofit that I operated years ago to help businesses get access to micro-lending services at lower interest rates so they can access those capital. Second is over the pandemic, so many businesses have accumulated rent debt. Because they could, rent is a fixed cost that you can't actually get out of from a variable level. So we need to do relief for rent debt to ensure that we can get small business back on track. And the last is workers. Workers have been leaving San Francisco for years due to lack of affordable housing, lack of the ability to pay rent. So we need to support things like a guaranteed income to enable our workers to live in San Francisco. I operate a foundation that helps support workers on a guaranteed income to help them with hundreds of dollars a month, help them stay in the city, and to support those things as well.
Right. So you technically, that was 3, Bilal, but I'll let it slide. You said access to capital, commercial rent debt, and guaranteed income to support workers. Matt, same question. 2 things.
Well, first of all, good to see
the
you.
The two most pressing issues facing small businesses today.
You can take one, Matt. Take one from me.
Well, everybody said something that I'm sure would be a challenge that small businesses are facing, because there are many, especially during the pandemic and coming out of it. And I first just want to thank you, Manny, and everyone who's hosting this debate. I think for me, in my experience, the first would be being able to compete with online retail and maintain storefronts. You know, we have so many regulations, so many taxes, so many barriers that go into being able to open and operate a retail business in San Francisco and California. And on the other hand, you've got Amazon and these big tech retailers who are able to do it without any of those barriers, often not paying taxes themselves. So if we want our businesses, our small businesses, to survive, our state and our city have to balance that out, have to make sure that we reduce barriers, that we reduce regulations and fees that are put on our small businesses so that they can actually thrive and compete with the Amazons. And we have to tax Amazon. We can't allow folks who aren't following the same laws as our small businesses to be able to essentially operate in a completely different world when we're asking our small businesses to do so much when it comes to a livable wage, a minimum wage, other types of regulations that you all follow, and you do it for the right reasons, but you also do it in a way that creates competitive disadvantages. The other thing that I would say is homelessness and housing. We have to build a lot more housing so that your workers can live closer to where they are, so that you don't have to constantly replace folks who are leaving because of housing. And also the homelessness that is on our streets actually creates huge challenges for small businesses to be able to thrive. And so by building more housing, including affordable housing, we can address those things, and it also supports small businesses.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you all for your answers. I heard being able to compete with online businesses and reducing regulations and fees to help with that, and then homelessness and housing. Let's go in reverse order. The last 2 years was a leadership test for people who cared about small businesses. It was an opportunity for us to show that we meant business as it relates to small business, because in a historic way, small businesses were asked to close for the greater good. So my question to you is what concrete things did you do over the last 2 years in response to the pandemic to support small businesses? Start with you, Matt.
Thank you. You know, this was a huge priority for me over the last 2 years. Our small businesses were hit as hard as anyone. and we had to make sure that they could survive and thrive. I worked hard as the chair of our budget committee to make sure we had new grants and investments in our small businesses. We waived fees and taxes so that we reduced some of the pressures that were being put on our small businesses. I called a special session of the Board of Supervisors where we brought everyone together when we were supposed to be on a recess to make sure that we were there for our small businesses, increasing the level of grants that were there when we had a surplus. I also authored the special fund for our entertainment and music venues. Though they were hit especially hard, they were the first to close and the last to be able to reopen. So in every way, making sure we had more support in investments and fee waivers and creating special funds. And I also went out there as a supervisor and made sure that I connected with small businesses, including small businesses that often don't have access to these types of programs, and made sure that they could access those services and supports. We have a lot more to do. Another thing that I did in the budget with my colleague Hillary Ronan, we created the first year free program so that we could have small businesses open a storefront by waiving all of the fees and costs associated with that. I supported Prop H. We have to make it easier to open and operate a small business. The state has a role for that, but I was there for our small businesses during COVID over the last few years. And I know we have a lot more work to do to make sure that we get out of this, not only pandemic, but the huge challenges that have come for small businesses associated with it.
Thank you, Matt. Bilal?
So for me, the pandemic was one of the inciting events that got me engaged in local politics over the last 2 years. And it was the issue of small business that was essential to that. Immediately when the pandemic hit, I set up a foundation to support local businesses here in San Francisco. And the first step was talking to dozens of small businesses, family-owned restaurants, especially around our district. And it was identifying what were the issues that mattered to them. And the first thing we did was help support the workers. We found that workers were leaving San Francisco in droves. We were talking a lot about how people in the private sector were leaving, but it was really workers, restaurant workers, coffee shop workers who were leaving. And so what we did was we set up a guaranteed income program for workers who did not qualify for PPP loans. There was a significant percentage of businesses that couldn't qualify for PPP loans because they had only been set up in 2020 or really recently. They didn't have a fiscal year to actually qualify for PPP. And also there were a bunch of workers who were undocumented. 35% of workers who work in restaurants are actually undocumented, so they couldn't qualify for PPP loans either. So we helped set up a guaranteed income program with a mutual aid organization to help fund workers that were struggling during the pandemic to ensure that they could qualify for getting the support they need to stay in San Francisco, stay in the Bay Area, and be able to work here at our restaurants and our businesses. The second was actually to support other organizations that were helping to provide patronage to our restaurants as well. Because foot traffic was so down, there was these innovative nonprofits that were helping to bring catered food to the small businesses. So we would take small businesses and cater it to shelters. And so I helped support those organizations as well to help increase the revenue they were losing as well. And so this was deeply important to me in that context. And those are the ways that I tried to support. And my journey into politics and local context and why I decided to run was I realized that these programs are really effective in the nonprofit sector, guaranteed income, ensuring access to capital. But it was going to require government to really subsidize the scale to support all small businesses. And that was one of the reasons I decided to run for state assembly.
Thank you so much, Thea.
Yes, well, I have a small business. And so one of the things that I went through, I think is what a lot of small businesses went through, which was, first of all, absolute panic, because you had no idea, I don't know, for those of you who don't have a small business, it is very common for a small business not to have more than 2 weeks worth of excess cash on hand. That is typical. And so when the government tells you you have to shut down, it is terrifying. And for those of us who are small businesses, we know how that felt. So I definitely went through a time of huge anxiety. And I was looking everywhere for help. And I was super relieved when the PPP came about. And what I found, and this is also through the course of running for assembly, is that in Chinatown in particular, 40% of the businesses were not able to apply for PPP. So I can only tell you that the level of anxiety for me went from here to here when I realized that I could get, and it wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough money to keep my employees and to not have to lay off all of my employees, and for me to continue my business for that short period of time. So I know there are a lot of people on this call who went through that same thing. Another thing I did, and this is as part of my day job, is I actually worked in 5 different disadvantaged business corridors. And we worked a lot actually with nonprofit organizations to get the word out about family-friendly ordinances that existed here in San Francisco. And we compensated the nonprofits for helping us to build the trust to get to these small businesses. And we worked in 5 different languages. And we, it's very important to us to be culturally competent. We do communications, outreach, and marketing. And one thing I learned from that is that there is not a lot of money for people to do multilingual outreach. And I think if we do care about, oh, sorry, I didn't see the thing. Anyhow, we do care about disadvantaged. Okay, thank you. If we do care about disadvantaged businesses, we really need to make sure that we have multilingual services for them so that we can actually communicate with them, because otherwise they don't know what's happening.
Thank you. And David, same question. Tell us about how you showed up for small businesses over the last 2 years.
Well, when the pandemic hit, I was actually working in Santa Clara County as a deputy county executive who helped oversee the response to COVID. And one of the things that we learned very quickly was the need to focus on helping small businesses that were struggling just with PPE and having the resources to protect their workers, as many of them were essential workers in response to the pandemic. But stepping back, one of the things that the pandemic illustrated was the importance of prioritizing small businesses. And if I have an overarching political philosophy, is this idea that we are only as strong as a society as those that have the least. And when it comes to the economy, that what defines the success of the economy is how the small businesses are doing. And one thing that I learned, because I had so many conversations with members of the Board of Supervisors, was the significance of having a legacy business program, that really created a lifeline for so many small businesses in San Francisco, and that to the extent that there were excess funds, surplus funds that the board had, that those funds were used through that legacy business program to save those businesses. I just saw in the paper the other day, yesterday actually, Supervisor Peskin helping to save a business using that. And this brings me to the underserved or underrepresented businesses owned by many minorities. I think the cultural district was also a lifeline. And it was really gratifying for me to see how in places like AD17, the existence of that cultural district allow those businesses to actually survive in the way that probably wouldn't have happened if they hadn't had that support. So I hope that answers that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's get into some specific questions. I've prepared individual questions, one for each of you. Why don't we start with Bilal? Bilal, you haven't really held elected office, so how can small businesses trust that if you were elected, you'd have their interest in mind if you were in the seat?
Yeah, I think it stems to that every job I've done has actually had a relationship to small business. I started in the Obama administration. We were in the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and we were working on small business legislation, helping with SBIR grants to expedite the process for grant-making processes for research grants to small businesses. We worked on legislation to help that was incorporated into the Jobs Act the subsequent year after I left. And so that was the foundation of my career. When I came back, I worked on a nonprofit. that I started to help with micro lending services for small businesses as well, where we're helping low interest loans and supporting that throughout the country as well as throughout the globe. And that was the start of my career, as running a social entrepreneurship venture to help with micro lending services. In the private sector, when I started my own company, we were providing free data services for thousands of small businesses so that they could compete with the Amazons of the world. And then after I sold that business, I then immediately started to reinvest it into my foundation, where we were supporting small businesses again, like we talked about with helping workers in the pandemic, as well as other restaurants that were struggling here in the Bay Area. So throughout my 10 years of my career through the public and the private sector, my focus has been on small business because it is the heart of what I believe San Francisco represents. When my parents moved here 35 years ago, I'm the child of immigrants. It was a small business. It was, I don't know if the Shalimar, the restaurant on Jones Street. Matt, I know it's close by to you as well. But it's my favorite restaurant. Some people like Pakwan. It's mine. But it's like growing up, that's what San Francisco represented to my family. We used to come here almost every other weekend. It was a beacon of hope. And I think that was the introduction, give my parents a taste of home. That's what small businesses and restaurants represent to our city. And that's why it's been so essential to my career as well. And that's why I'll fight for it once I'm in the assembly as well, because it's deeply important to my parents' journey here in the city. It's deeply important to my career. And it's why we feel the need to fight for it in the assembly as well.
Thank you so much, Bilal. Matt, you were the supervisor of District 8 with some of the worst street conditions in San Francisco, an issue that you just mentioned is of importance of small business and has a direct effect on a small business's ability to be viable. What have you actually done to address this issue? And what's your response to the claim that things actually have not gotten better since you were supervisor of District 6, but actually have gotten worse?
Well, I live in the Tenderloin. I work with small businesses and visit them every day. And everything that I do in my role as District 6 supervisor has been about improving the conditions here. It's why I ran for office, and we've been able to make a lot of progress. We've also experienced, as we've talked about here, the pandemic in the middle of it. So it's been a very challenging time for District 6 as well as for our entire city. We've brought weekly deep pressure washing to every block in the Tenderloin. We've brought hundreds of big belly trash cans. We've brought community safety ambassadors on nearly every block in the neighborhood. We've brought more housing and supportive housing than anywhere else in the city here in my district. We brought more police and more police academies and more foot patrols to the neighborhood. We've brought more open spaces and new creative ways to use our streets to activate for the residents of our neighborhoods. We've taken a place just a few blocks from me on the corner of Golden Gate and Hyde, which was an abandoned post office, to now a thriving hub for small businesses at La Cocina. So we are seeing changes in the Tenderloin and District 6, even in a very challenging time. This is a time when our district and my neighborhoods have been hit harder than any, to be fair. Office workers aren't here, conventions aren't here, tourists haven't been coming. And yet, even in that context, we've made progress on street conditions, on homelessness, on housing, on street cleaning, on a new Department of Sanitation. And so I will say, just to close, we can't do it alone. District 6, the Tenderloin, cannot fix all of these problems in one neighborhood. We need support and shared responsibility across the city and state.
Thanks so much, Matt. David, you're seen as one of the leaders of the Healthcare Security Ordinance, HCSO, which small businesses and customers have been paying into for years. You all know about it. It's that health ESF charge that you get. The funds support healthcare coverage for employees, which is a noble goal. However, a significant portion of the revenue sits untouched. In 2020, it was supposed to be $203 million, and a corporate third-party vendor is making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in fees just to hold the unused accounts. Given all this, a lot of small business owners have expressed frustration at the program. Could that money be used in a more effective way? And what ideas do you have to improve the program that you helped start?
Well, I think that the goal of that program and where that money should go is to provide healthcare to workers. And I think that to the extent that that money goes unused, that we need to figure out how to provide those resources so that workers can access, healthcare. I mean, that was the objective. I actually believe that when it comes to healthcare, that it is in the interest of small businesses to make sure that their workers have healthcare, and that having a healthy worker is an essential part of a successful business. And quite frankly, as a consumer and a customer of many of these businesses, I want to make sure that that's the case. I don't think that it is a good thing for the money to go mainly to third-party administrators. So if people have ideas about that, I'm certainly open to hearing them. But I am very proud of the fact that it was under my leadership that we worked with the business community to make sure that we closed the loophole that allowed many businesses, and in fact, a small number of them, but many of them, relative to percentage small, but many of them to have money go into accounts for the purpose of providing healthcare, only to revert back to those businesses. And I think it was a matter of fairness in terms of leveling the playing field. But the bottom line is, I think that all of us, and small businesses being key among them, will benefit from having reform in our healthcare system. That's why I believe that one of the most critical issues facing our society is making Medicare for all and single payer a reality in California. I think that's something that in the end will save billions and billions of dollars, including saving small businesses a lot of money if we make that happen. And that's why that will be my top priority if elected, to finally make Medicare for all a reality in the state of California. I think that will help small businesses more than any other business.
Thank you so much, David. Thea, you created the Lower Haight Merchants and Neighborhood Association. Seems nice. Can you point to one or two clear things that you did in its leadership to prevent businesses in that neighborhood from closing and help the local economy grow?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very proud of being one of the three co-founders of the Lower Haight Merchant and Neighborhood Association. I started it because there was a double homicide across the street from my house. And I realized we were not coming together. We were not coming together as a community. The police wasn't paying attention to us. There was very much of a containment zone kind of an attitude, particularly for my block. And so when we came together, we formed this LOHAMNA, as we call it, Lower Haight Merchant and Neighborhood Association. And particularly during COVID, I think that, and partially because of some of the people who are on this call, like Masood's group, the Council of District Merchants, was able to give a grant to the Lower Haight Merchant and Neighborhood Association, and we've been able to then pass that money along to various merchants who are in need. We also strung lights along the Haight Street on both sides of the street for about 3 blocks. We also created a really cool program, which was, there was no cost involved, that volunteers would work with restaurants to get food to people free of charge. So we would act as the middle person, Grubhub or one of those kinds of things, but we did it for free. And we did it because we wanted to help the restaurants as much as possible and allow them to keep the full amount of money that they get, and also help the people who did not feel at the time that they would be able to go out. But then probably the biggest thing that we've done, honestly, we also did a giant mural on Laguna and Haight, which brought in a lot of people, a lot of attention. But probably the biggest thing we did is we tried to make it a safer neighborhood, and we succeeded. When I got here, there were gunshots frequently. Now we are safe. We are in, I think we only had 3 businesses close in the Lower Haight, and we're closing in on thriving. We're not there yet, but we're getting better.
Okay, I'm going to ask that we shorten answers to 1 minute just to get a couple more questions in and keep things a little bit tighter. If that's okay with Kim, yes, and Terry. Next, I'm going to let you all choose one of 2 categories to go in. There's 2 questions, so you can choose, each of you will be able to answer one of the 2, and it's liquor and cannabis. So which would you like? So David, do you want liquor or cannabis?
I'll take cannabis. I don't
liquor.
drink, so I guess,
Oh,
you
it's
know.
fine. Matt,
probably-
liquor or cannabis?
Well, just to switch it up, I'll take liquor.
Okay, and so then Bilal, I'll give you cannabis as well, and Thea, I'll give you liquor. It's the same
Okay.
question for each of the vices, but I'm gonna letting you all choose. So you took liquor, Matt. So Matt and Thea, your liquor. The question is about the cost of a liquor license. It costs about $250,000 to get a liquor license right now in San Francisco because the state has quotas on how many we're allowed to have in a certain area. So that's a lot of money to get a liquor license. It's one of the best ways to make money in small business. At the same time, a lot of legacy bars are relying on their liquor licenses as their nest egg to survive, because that is, in some cases, the whole value of some of these bars, and they're banking on that if they ever go out of business. So what do? $250,000 to get a liquor license, but it's also the lifeline for a lot of bar owners. Why don't we start with you, Matt, and then Thea? You guys have 1 minute each.
Well, we put too much of the burden on small businesses. We shouldn't make it so hard to operate a business that sells liquor. We should allow those businesses to stay open later. We shouldn't have it be like the golden ticket, where you can't either pass it to somebody else or open another business. These create incredible barriers that I think we learned in the pandemic. We have to change. We have to make it easier for folks to sell a liquor that allows it to be taken out, used outside. These barriers, I think, hurt small businesses. They hurt our ability to have arts and culture and entertainment and performance in our cities. Of course, we need to have appropriate regulations, but all of these barriers and bureaucracy that just create more and more costs as it relate to businesses, nightlife businesses, corner stores, entertainment venues are not effective, not helpful, and I'll work to make sure we lift them as
awesome. Thank you, Mr. Haney. Thea, same question. How do we square the circle?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it kind of like taxi medallions. I don't know if y'all have been following the whole taxi medallion thing where, the difference is even with taxi medallions is they paid $250,000 for these things that were supposed to be their pensions at the end of the day. And they're pretty much worthless now. And it's a really bad situation that, we certainly don't want any of our small businesses, and taxi drivers are really small businesses as well, to be suffering from. I think the real problem is the flip problem, which is we don't have pensions as small business owners. We are basically, most of us don't turn into big businesses. We basically provide for our families and for our employees. We provide living wages for our families and our employees. We don't have pensions. So I think what we need to think of as government, as the state, is how do we provide for small businesses and for our elders so that they can retire, so that they don't have to look at this as a pension at the end of the day, but instead that they actually get pensions.
Thank you, Thea. Let's go to cannabis. David's preferred vice, at least for this question. So right now, it's nearly impossible to run a cannabis business at all because of incredible federal taxes, and the state has created insane excise taxes that if you don't pay immediately, you get an automatic 50% penalty. So if you owe $500,000 in excise taxes to the CDTFA, you don't pay immediately on time, you get a 50% penalty immediately.
Wow.
David, what do you think the state can do to change this to make it easier to actually make money owning and running a cannabis business?
Well, look, I've always been a strong supporter of cannabis, and I think that being an LGBTQ person has a lot to do with it. The cannabis industry or community saved so many people during the AIDS crisis. But I think that we need to reform taxation when it comes to cannabis. I think that the taxation system we have in place in many respects is punitive. That it is driven by this idea that this business and this industry should not exist. And I personally think that it is short-sighted. And one of the things that I look forward to doing at the state level is what I did as a supervisor, to work with the industry to figure out reforms to taxation that make sense, that allow for them to pay their fair share, but also doesn't punish them. And I also think it's important that we find ways of providing more equity and having more access to that industry, to the communities of color and to women who, quite frankly, are underrepresented in that industry.
Thank you so much, David. Bilal, same question on cannabis.
So I agree with Mr. Campos that we definitely need to reform our taxes. But I think another thing we should do is San Francisco has a new law with public banking. I've been a strong supporter of that as well. And as you indicated, Manny, a lot of the problem that's facing cannabis businesses is that there's inconsistent regulations between the federal and the state and local laws. And so where a lot of cannabis businesses can't get access to traditional banking infrastructures, at least to the public banking system, assuming it's able to be provided for cannabis businesses as well, enable public banks to actually provide financial services so they can get lending, get loans that are non-prejudicial, and ensure that they don't go through traditional financial institutions that might be regulated at the federal government, that might block it from businesses that are owned by people of color, or businesses from low-income individuals, or cannabis businesses that have inconsistent federal regulations in them as well. So one thing I would advocate for is reforming and instituting public banks throughout California to enable them to offer financial services so they can be delivered to cannabis businesses as well.
Awesome. Let's ask a somewhat controversial question, but we're here at 6:46 p.m. It's happy hour somewhere. These are 3 or 4 associations that specifically represent disadvantaged communities, in addition to small business. One of the questions that I had was about whether you think we empower individual residents and community members too much in the process of bringing in a new business into a community through things like discretionary review. And if so, how would you change that? If not, why? And again, we're weighing things like the ability to stop businesses that might cause gentrification versus having one person or a couple people decide that they don't want a business to come into a community and stopping that commercial corridor from filling a retail vacancy. So what do you think about this? 1 minute. Let's start with you, Bilal, since you answered last.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's too much local control in this context, and we all are familiar with the case of the ice cream shop that took $200,000 in continued fees and trying to pay rent before it could actually open. Before they could even open, they had to shut down. And so I think we need to raise, one of the quick things we can do is we should raise the threshold. Obviously, this is a city thing, not something the state can actually make a change on, but we need to raise the threshold of the amount of community input. It shouldn't just be one person's ability to block the ability for a business. It can't just be one business that wants to block a competing business from being able to open. There's too many laws and permits and fees that are hindering our ability to start a business, on average taking $100,000 to $200,000 in fees to start up a business here and small business in San Francisco. So I do think there's too much local control. It needs to be reformed, potentially by raising the threshold of the amount of people that have to qualify to block some kind of legislation like that. So that's one of the things that we would support and need to change.
Thanks, Bilal. David, do you agree with Bilal, or do you have a different perspective?
To unmute myself. Well, I think it's a balance, and I think that's where I think leadership is really important, and I think, take the area of cannabis as an example. I think one of the reasons why the Brownie Mary Democratic Club is supporting me is that I supported the opening of medical cannabis dispensaries where it was the right thing to do, even though there were some folks who for NIMBY reasons, because they don't like cannabis, opposed it, and there was no justification for that opposition. There are other examples, actually, just your own business, Manny. I'm proud of the fact that I supported your efforts to open, and some of the requests and expectations and demands from some people were simply unreasonable. I think it is a balance. I think that there are times when people go overboard, and it's important as a leader to push back, as an elected leader especially. I also think it's important to hear the community voice. And again, it's really about finding the right balance in a given situation.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate it. I appreciated your help. Matt, same question. Local control, discretionary reviews. How much input is the right amount of input?
Well, I think we do make it too hard to open small businesses. We put a lot of barriers. We put different costs involved. I talked about first year free that I know that we worked on together, Manny, with other folks who are here. to make it easier to open a small business. I supported Prop H that was on the ballot that tried to streamline and shorten the time at which a business can open. We've opened up more possibilities for folks to open up things like shared spaces and parklets. These are things that I think that we need to do to get out of the way of our small businesses, to support them. I think some of the rules, for example, that prevented a burrito shop from opening in North Beach were ridiculous. There were just, 2 other stores of a similar owner, and that's not a chain. These are things that really we need to break down, get out of the way of our small businesses, help them thrive, and stop putting up barriers that make it harder and harder for them to operate.
Thank you, Matt. Thea, same question.
Yeah, so this has been an interesting one for our neighborhood. I come from a very laissez-faire background, meaning if you are gutsy enough to want to start a small business, and I think you have to have a lot of guts to start a small business, then go for it. That's kind of how I feel. But one of my mentors was Eric Arguello, who is with Calle 24. And Eric Arguello takes a very different approach. He takes a very curated approach on who should and should not be in. And it's really less about, I think it's it's a combination of community, but it's also Calle 24 that is making some, sort of very, very curated decisions. And so I think that you can do things in different ways, and that's one way. And the other way would be kind of like, come on in, and if you can make it, great, and if you can't, you're going to go away, because you got to make money. You can't be in the red and be a small business.
Got it. I think we have time for a couple more questions. This is ultimately a legislative position, right? You all, if you become a member of the state assembly, you'll be there to craft laws, vote on bills, vote on policy. So a kind of overarching question is, if you were elected, you are our representative in the state assembly, what pieces of legislation would you attempt to turn into law that would materially impact the lives of small business owners in San Francisco? And how would you get it done in your first year? Matt.
Thank you for the question. There are a couple of things I would do. One is there's still more work to be done on some of the unfinished business of David Chiu, who was our outgoing assembly member. He had a bill, AB915, that I think small businesses really need us to continue to champion as the next assembly member. There's a law that already currently exists that says that there's a 25% goal for minority small business and disabled veteran business contracts for all state contracts. But most departments don't meet that goal. There's no enforcement, there's no oversight, and there's no teeth to it. And so AB 915 would actually have brought some teeth to it. That bill died. I will champion that, because not only do we need to support our small businesses and be able to open and operate currently, but we've got to make sure that the billions and billions of dollars that are used at the state level actually go to small businesses and small business contracts, and AB 915 would be a top priority for me.
Thank you so much, Matt. Same question, David. It's a legislative position. You were a legislator in the Board of Supervisors. What would you try to pass in your first year, and how would you get it done?
Well, I think that the reason why I have so much support from small businesses is because I was a very effective legislator who always championed small businesses. And, the first thing that I would do, by the way, is call for a recovery program that prioritizes small businesses. I think the state should put in money and actually provide financial assistance to small businesses. I think that's the first thing that I would do. The second thing that I would do is that I think that reforming the healthcare system through Medicare for all and single payer, I think will also be something that will benefit small businesses. I would take the legacy business program concept and take it statewide. I think that we need to figure out ways in which we can provide assistance to these legacy businesses that are the heart of these neighborhoods. And then I think that we need a special assistance to some of these minority-owned businesses through contracts. I would look at the implementation of how contracts are awarded and oversee and audit agencies that are clearly not complying with that objective.
Thank you so much, David. Thea.
Yeah, so I was on the High Speed Rail Authority Board, and we had a 30% SBE requirement. It was not encouraged, it was required. And I absolutely agree that we need to get not encouragement, but requirement, because as long as you encourage it, it doesn't happen. I know that as a small business person, if you want government contracts, you have to require it, and you have to follow up on the back end and make sure that there is compliance. So I would be happy also to work on AD17 and probably strengthen it a bit. Second thing is spreading shared spaces across California. I think that's one of the best things that happened to a lot of our small businesses. It made us more like Paris. I don't know how many times I heard that, and I think that's a good thing. Third thing is there are tax problems when a building is flipped and a merchant is in the building, then the person who flips it, who generally is very, very rich, then shoves the taxes down to the merchant. I want to stop that. I don't think that should be allowed.
Thank you, Thea. And Bilal, same question.
Yeah, so
what you gonna do?
I would do three things. One, based on the priorities. What are the emergencies facing small businesses today? We talked about how commercial rent debt has risen significantly, and it's something that's going to affect so many small businesses. So I believe Senator Wiener had a bill that he tried in the first year of the pandemic, which was a one-to-one tax relief for small businesses, where we give a one-to-one tax credit to commercial landlords. If they give rent abatement to the small business, they will get that tax credit. So that's one of the first things I would try. The second is guaranteed income to help support the workers to stay here to work in our small businesses. I would work through the Earned Income Tax Credit Program to raise the threshold to $70,000, $75,000 and ensure that we can expand that so we get more access to guaranteed income for more individuals through an Earned Income Tax Credit. And the third is, we haven't really talked about it too much, but we're still in a pandemic and it's becoming an endemic situation. So how do we ensure that when the next outbreak comes, that our small businesses don't have to shut down? And that's going to be ensuring that we ensure that the surplus of funds that we have right now in our budget go to more PPE, go to more 24-hour testing, go free 24-hour testing and backward and forward contact tracing so that we can control pandemics in the next one so we don't have to shut down our economy.
Thank you so much. We have 3 minutes left, and I intend this to be our last question. And you know what? I'm gonna ask this. Let's end on a fuzzy, warm and fuzzy note, shall we? It's been a long day. Tell us a story about a small business owner that you've gotten to know over the years in your community. Tell us about them and why they matter to you. And I'm off limits, so don't talk about me. Bilal.
I'll share the story with Shalimar in the Tenderloin on Jones Street. I've been going to that restaurant since I was a kid. It was one of the first box dining restaurants in the entire Bay Area. And it's an amazing story because I think it represents what San Francisco means to so many of us. I don't know if many people know, but it was actually started by a group of cab drivers who wanted to just set up the place for them to eat themselves. My parents were some of the first patrons to the restaurant, and now it's thankfully a franchise, a couple locations across the Bay Area. And it's been really endearing that over the last couple of years to be able to visit and get to know the owner even more. And just to see, like, I think one of the most brilliant things about the restaurants, the prices haven't changed in 30 years and the menu still looks exactly the same newspaper format that it did 30 years ago. But I think one dispiriting thing was when I talked to him a couple of months back was that the first time they've raised prices in 30 years was actually during the pandemic because they were struggling so much. Still pretty amazing price, but it kind of showed that even for a business that's been here for so long, they even had to adapt. And I think that shows that we need to better support small businesses to keep the ones that are already here.
Thank you, Bilal. Matt, tell us about a small business owner that you know and why they matter to you.
You know, I live on Hyde Street in the Tenderloin, and I spend a lot of time at our small businesses here. One of the small businesses that I go to every day is All Star Donuts on the corner of Golden Gate and Hyde, and it's one of our tougher corners. Van, who's the owner, is someone that I check in with every day and talk about what's going on in the area, talk about some of the things that need to be done better. There was a time actually during the pandemic where her landlord attempted to really aggressively increase her rent. And I supported her and the community supported her, and we were able to negotiate that down and make sure she was able to stay there. And she's a real, hub for the community. And I think our small businesses add so much, not only to provide essential goods and services, but actually are the center of our community, and everybody knows them, and they really keep us all together. And Van is a great example of that in Tenderloin.
Thank you so much, David.
I mean, I want to mention someone that actually Trustee Thea Selby mentioned, and that's Eric Arguello. I met Eric Arguello when he was running a restaurant with his family. And through that experience and over the years, I have seen him go from that to always think about how we could help other businesses. He was running his own business and yet thinking about other people as well. And he has played a critical role. And through that experience, it is him who has been a source of a lot of information to figure out how we could help small businesses, and some of the ideas that have been the most successful and effective measures to help small businesses came from that relationship. The Legacy Business Program, we looked to London, which created it to figure out how we could bring it to San Francisco. The Cultural District, which by the way, at first was opposed by Mayor Lee and his administration, figuring out how we could support those minority-owned businesses. So I give Eric Arguello a lot of credit for, helping me understand the challenges of small businesses.
Thank you so much, Matt. Matt already answered. Thea.
Yeah, first I have to say, GGBA, I gotta say something. You guys were critical to my business. Gina Graham, I don't know if she's still on the board, but she did a spectacular job of renovating our presentation that we give to government agencies. So I just want to give a huge shout out to you as an ally. And then if I could, I would point out it's now called Doe. It's across the street on Market Street. They used to have Marvelous and the Little Griddle. You may know them. Philip Ma is his name. That's why it's called Marvelous. And they have really struggled during the pandemic. I go to them very frequently, and they had to shut down Marvelous. They shut down Little Griddle. Now they just have one place open. And every time I go in there, I ask them how's business, and they shake their heads, and it has not come back. I know it hasn't. And they worked really, really hard to stay open. And this is how I know in my very, very heart that we have to help our small businesses better.
Thank you so much, Thea. I feel like we fit in a lot in 50 minutes. I feel like we got through a lot of stuff. The truth is that for those who are watching and those who listened, there is a lot of agreement between the four of these candidates on small business. That isn't surprising. There's disagreement on other issues, of course. It's a good thing that there seems to be a lot of commonality around them with small business. And I would just say to the four of you, one of you is going to be our representative in the State Assembly. And it's really lovely to hear you talk about all the things you have done and will do for small businesses. But small business owners are going to rely on you to continue to do those things if you do get elected. We don't have fancy lobbyists. We don't have, well-funded advocacy groups. We barely have any full-time employees fighting for us in any capacity in the city or in the state. So we're going to rely on you to just care, to remember us and to think about us as you prioritize all the different pieces of legislation you do and all the ways that you spend your days. And so I'm asking you, and I think I can speak on behalf of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Filipino American Chamber of Commerce, the Golden Gate Business Association, the CDMA, when I say, please don't forget us, even if we're not the ones in your offices all the time, asking you to remember us, because most of us are spending our days like I am, like Masood is, like Carlos is, like Jose is, like Terry is, running our businesses and trying to make ends meet. So with that, I want to thank all of our candidates for your participation in tonight's forum, and I wish you luck. Thank you to our event organizer, the Golden Gate Business Association, the San Francisco Bay Area LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, and thank you to the co-sponsoring organizations, the Hispanic Chambers of Commerce of San Francisco, the San Francisco Filipino American Chamber of Commerce, and the San Francisco Council of District Merchants. Thank you to Flow Communications for handling tech for tonight. It says for me to thank my team at Manny's for my support, but they all went home already, so I'll thank them in absentia. And stay strong, you all. I know you've been doing a lot of these. I know it can be tiring. You have 12 days left until the primary, and sei gesund, as we say in Yiddish. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody, good luck.
Good night.
Don't forget.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Nice meeting everybody.
Gracias a todos. Ciao, amigo. Terry, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Carlos.
Excellent.
Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you, Carlos.
You guys have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon.